Emily Maitlis. It's been trending on Twitter since last night because she has been doing a speech at the Edinburgh International TV Festival talking about innate bias in BBC coverage. Now, I've not watched any of this, I've just seen the commentary about it. And straight off the bat, trying to call out the BBC for being biased now rather than, you know, during the last two general elections, perchance, it just kind of show the kind of implicit BBC bias in the, it's fine to be biased against Jeremy Corbyn, but not apparently not fine against Keir Starmer. But I digress. Either way, we'll be dissecting it. I'm gonna bring it up just when she starts talking about press involvement in the speech, and then we'll go from there, and then I'll add my commentary. That sounds like a good plan. Let's fucking do it.
But what I want to look at today is where we come in, journalists, broadcasters, specifically the impact that populist rhetoric is having on the way we do our job. So,
Oh god, I'll go fucking populist rhetoric. I hate this shit. This deliberate plan to try and conflate people on the left and then people on the right, as if these are somehow ideologies that share any amount of kind of political alignment, by kind of lumping them all into the same populist label, as if wanting to drown migrants in the Channel and wanting to privatize literally every single state asset and sell it off to the highest bidder, right? As if that's somehow ideologically similar to people who just want people to be fed and homed and not have to pay through the nose of their energy bills. Like I hate that people like liberals like Maitlis will immediately try and equivocate between these two positions as just part of populism. Corbyn and Boris Johnson are pretty Trumpy and they're very similar. I'm like, come on, pull the other one, mate.
social media creates an arena that is exceptionally favourable to the language of populism because it benefits simplistic, emotional messages that suits the elevation of grievance. And ours is an industry that rewards speed, amplification, and the intimacy of the anonymous off-record briefing. Many studies have looked at the impact that the media has had on helping populists to power. But I now want to ask the opposite question.
And again, it's literally just like if you're talking about the far right or the hard right, in the case of people who aren't explicitly kind of socially conservative but do want to basically privatize huge swathes of the economy, like the libertarian ANCAP types, right? Just say, right? Just say that you mean the hard right. Populism is just it's just liberal scaremongering tactic to make you think that somehow social democrats, which is basically what Jeremy Corbyn was, are as bad as out and out fascist sympathisers. Which, let's be real, let's be fair, right? Plenty of members of the Conservative Party are now. I'm not saying all of them are, although it's the ideology behind the Conservative Party, but you can definitely see this. There's a lot of entryism happening in the Tories right now, and it's driving a lot of You look at all of the messaging that's come out of the Conservative leadership election, the way in which they're demonising certain minority groups to make people think differently about the failures of neoliberal capitalism. Where have we seen that before? Like, that is fascistic rhetoric. And to say that it isn't there is just nonsensical, right? But to try and equivocate that to, what people on the left have been trying to agitate for, both at the last general election and also now, is just absolutely nonsensical.
What effect does ruling populism have on how we work? One person who studied this intensively is the Gates-Cambridge scholar Ayala Paniewski. She's looked at the way that populist rhetoric has been used to discredit and to disempower journalists. We got used to that enemies of the people vitriol at the height of the MAGA days. But then came more subtle ways: doxing of journalists, cyberbullying, the tweeting out of private journalistic inquiries to encourage a public pile-on. She notes that even the right of reply can, and frequently is, used as a way of them airing claims that are meant to put journalists in their place, as they know that a fair and balanced media will feel compelled to cover them. But
what's interesting as well is that this has only become a comment about how people talk about journalists in this particular economic period, right? Where all of the critiques of journalism as a private institution specifically, you think about manufacturing consent, you think about the Brass Stack, whatever it's called, that book about how essentially new journalism at its core as a private institution will always prop up the interests of capital, because capital is what drives their profit motive. So they can't be seen to be erring outside of that wheelhouse. Like, they will happily support any cause as long as it's not socialist in any kind of sense of the word, right?
And I think this is where it gets interesting. Apart from these methods of incitement of the public, there's also, she says, the impact on journalists themselves.
You're right,
This is
Seraphine.
her. The way populist rhetoric is used to discredit journalists turns into a sophisticated form of soft censorship. And she uses a term that I hadn't come across before, strategic bias, to explain the way we may be inclined to respond to accusations made against us. Unlike other targets of populist criticism, journalists find themselves required to mediate. We have to mediate that criticism to the public, so we are then put in a particularly awkward position. And the outcome, she writes, is ironic.
But also, I think a lot of this as well, like, I'm not going to deny that there are plenty of journalists who face huge amounts of abuse, right? And that's obviously completely unacceptable. But there's been long strain in British political journalism for a very long time, because 51% of British journalists are from private schools as opposed to 7% of the population, still way overrepresented in the kind of upper echelons within journalism within the UK, and for a very very long time they always saw themselves as above everybody, as they had some kind of divine right to be able to opine their particular opinions to the public and have it accepted as being, as being received wisdom. And that the kind of and she talks about social media and the pushback that journalists get, and I'm not saying that there's not a reasonable amount of that is just abusive and is just harassing for speaking out with opinions that differ from the consensus of whatever person is attacking that journalist at that time. But a lot of it is just reasonable criticism. You look at David Aronovich flatly refusing to think about the ideological biases of the people who pay his bills and how that might affect their reporting output, and that he just feels like he's completely above criticism because it's the unwashed masses, essentially, who now have a voice in the area of social media, right? We can now respond to our journalists directly in the replies on Twitter, on Facebook, through all of these social media sites. It's not just in the reply column in the newspaper that gets flatly ignored every single week, right? We actually have a platform to criticize journalists for the things that they do and say. And a lot of them, they don't like that. They don't like not being seen as being the arbiters of truth, the arbiters of what is considered acceptable discourse and what isn't. And that's expanded now. I think that's a good thing. The harassment is not, but the expansion of the discourse, 100% certainly, I believe, is an improvement on this kind of protected class of journalism, especially considering, as I said previously, how much of them are overrepresented by people from an incredibly high class, and the way in which things like how benefit claimants were discussed in the 2000s was definitely down to ideological capturing of the a journalist as a class of people, rather than any kind of fact or any kind of empirical basis for that.
Ironic that journalists under attack end up practicing bias in order to signal their balance and impartiality. It is, she believes, a coping mechanism. We do it to ourselves. Now, populism, make no mistake, is not a traditional ism of ideology. It's not Marxism or Reaganism. It has no adherence to a set belief or policy. The political scientist Kasmuda explains it as the idea that society is separated into two groups at odds with one another, the pure people and the corrupt elite. The editor...
Would one call that a dialectic? But the problem is that this is, again, why this idea of left populism and right populism suddenly being something that you can lump together just makes no fucking sense. Because right populists believe that there's some nasty cabal of people who are deliberately there to try and put them down for expressing wrong thing, trying to cancel them because they just hate people and want to do evil stuff. And then leftist populism is, no, there's just a class of people who are split based upon their material interests, like people who sell their labour power to capitalists and capitalists to extract surplus value from people's labour, right? These people have an antagonistic relationship. It's nothing to do with anybody being evil or anybody being, malicious or some kind of secret new deep state of people trying to undermine the common man or whatever. It's just people acting within their material interests based upon the economic precepts of the society. This is a material analysis of how these things work, and we're not making moral judgments of the people in that system at all. And again, she's saying, well, it's not Marxism or Reaganism. It's just the idea that both of these things set they try and divide people into the ruling class, the elites, and regular people. Which, again, you could say that the bourgeois are the ruling class, and I would certainly say that they are within liberal society, because these are the people who, again, are the journalists, right? The journalism, the people of the, again, I guess actually even more, the people who run the institutions who put out journalism are the people who have the power to dictate what the narrative is. And so, and it always, almost certainly, serves bourgeois interests, as we will almost certainly see later on.
In Chief of Foreign Policy, Moises Naim, goes a step further. He says, populism is best understood as a strategy for gaining and wielding power. Frequently, it's a method of campaign.
As opposed to what we have now, where people wield power through the power of the power of the press and the power of anti-socialism and the power of being part of the ruling class. Oh God, this is such. I just absolutely despise like this liberal idea. They're just somehow above ideology. I fucking hate that shit.
Campaigning, often in the guise of the underdog. And once in power, in government, it continues to campaign, picking imaginary fights to assert its struggle, even though it is now demonstrably, undeniably, the top dog, not the underdog. So what follows here, just to be clear, is not a critique of left or right, Conservatives versus Labour, Democrat versus Republican. None of this has anything to do with policy. It's why populist parties can shapeshift between the right and left, attract voters of traditional parties or none.
No, that's not true. That's just not the fucking case. That they somehow shapeshift. When has Boris Johnson been anything other than right wing? When was Donald Trump anything other than right wing? Everybody on the left, every single person on kind of the left populist, as she would call them. No one here, none of us ever would think of supporting somebody like Boris Johnson, because it's against our material interests to do so. God, liberals, but fucking.
Not an ideology. It is a means to achieve and retain power. And I speak from experience when I say that it took us too long.
With power for what ends? The issue is that on the left, they're explicitly trying to get into power to reach some utilitarian goal to make life better for people. And on the right, it's power for the sake of power. Do you think Boris Johnson had a specific ideological goal, Emily? No, of course he fucking didn't. He'll literally do and say anything that gets him into power. And whereas you look at, for example, what she probably is comparing here is Jeremy Corbyn, right? And you look at somebody who had explicit policy platform that he wanted to implement and had explicit goals as to why implementing those policies would be good.
To recognise it for what it was.
Well, yeah, of course it absolutely is anti-radicalism, Sarah Vane. It's just like the liberal idea that they are the true ones who are acting without ideology. Like this, what Keir Starmer people were saying, things like being pragmatic but not ideological, which again, your views on what is and is not pragmatic is defined by your ideology. There is no such thing as ideology-free politics.
And to find the journalistic tools needed to deal with it. I remember to my shame interviewing the Trump acolyte Sebastian Gorka on Newsnight in the early days of the Trump victory. Gorka would use up most of the interview time by screaming abuse at the BBC. Now, he didn't have any problem with the BBC. He quite liked the BBC, and he was always happy to say yes to the interview. But he used our time on air, and that of many of my colleagues, as an effective conduit to sell a key populist message, that the mainstream media could be dismissed as fake. Now, once you understand how this works, it seems so obvious. You kick down belief in a trusted source of news, you make the audience doubt what they're seeing, and you step into the breach, a shameless play for power and dominance. But in those days, I didn't. And as a journalist, I was mortified. And I would spend half of our allotted interview time trying to defend our objectivity, and the rest bending over backwards to reconcile his strangled version of the truth just to prove his criticism of me wrong. In so doing, ironically, I lost the very objectivity I was seeking to defend. When I was writing this, I actually looked back at an interview I did with him.
Well, it's interesting as well in that when you get people like what happened with the fake news and stuff, the retort is never, here's an alternative hypothesis. This is what really this is what really happened. Here's some evidence, and here's our reason for believing something different. It's just no, that's just fake news, which I think is you never see that on the other side of the political spectrum.
2018, to see if Ayala Paniewski's words rang true. I was thinking, won't be me, I'll be fine. I was horrified. My opening question to him, I said this: Dr. Gorka, I know in our previous encounters we have spent a lot of time analysing whether Newsnight itself is fake news. So just for the sake of our viewers and moving the story on, why don't we agree to recognise that's how you view things? It is insane. We didn't spend a lot of time analysing. He levelled the accusation to get social media traction, and I allowed it to become viable debate. You see where I'm going with this? Either way, Gorka won and the BBC lost. This was when
It is very interesting about what the BBC thinks is acceptable to turn into a debate, right? I'll probably leave that one there, but there's plenty of examples you can give.
Donald Trump was already finding his feet as president. But our mistakes started long before that. I'm going to take you this time to early 2016. The UK is beginning to debate the big questions around Britain's potential exit from the EU. It's
Yes, we're going to go on to Brexit. This is definitely not going to make me incredibly upset.
complicated stuff. We're trying to offer our viewers both sides of a fiendishly difficult debate, and that intention was right. But we still got it wrong. We fell into what we might call the Patrick Minford paradigm. In other words, it might take our producers 5 minutes to find 60 economists who feared Brexit and 5 hours to find a sole economic voice who espoused it. But by the time we went on air, we simply had one of each. We presented this unequal effort to our audience as if it was balance. It wasn't. I'd later learned.
Now do the same talking about the issue around trans people. Now do the same thing about how many doctors you can find who agree with the overall medical consensus around trans people, and then also try and find some ridiculous gender-critical person who thinks that we're all AGP, tranny faggot rapists. I dare you.
That the ungainly name for this myopic style of journalism was both-sidism, which talks to the way it reaches a superficial balance whilst obscuring a deeper truth. This stage, I'd never heard the term, or indeed the criticism. I just thought we were doing our job. 1 year after the Brexit vote, shortly after the 2017 election had left Prime Minister May without a majority and in a particularly precarious position, I remember interviewing the prominent Leave campaigner, also a former candidate for Prime Minister, Andrea Leadsom. The EU Council President had told the BBC of his concerns over Brexit relations. And when I asked Ms Leadsom what she could point to that was going well in the negotiations, she told me, with some exasperation, it would be helpful if broadcasters were willing to be a bit patriotic. The country took a decision. Now look, you could argue that my patriotism at that moment was shown in an attempt to do the job well, interpret for our licence fee paying public the state of government negotiations. But I do think that's missing the point. It's certainly missing the strategy. Because the way
I mean, it's definitely because patriotism is just kind of a nonsense phrase about the Imagine community that exists as essentially just as a virtue signal to try and justify other things that are unjustifiable on utilitarian grounds.
Populism works on us as journalists is to somehow seek to divide us from the public, to make us feel that we are not of the people, that those in power are the only ones that can understand normal folk, and that we, the media, are somehow...
No, but you serve who's in power. That's the whole point, right? The whole point of the Chomsky and Herman critique of journalism is they explicitly serve power through the basic of their own material interests, right? We've all seen the Chomsky interview with Ma, where Ma claims, how can you possibly tell me that I'm self-censoring in favour of capital? And Chomsky's like, no. You don't self-censor. You believe everything that you say. I'm sure that you do, right? But if you believed anything else, you would not be sitting where you're sitting right now.
Getting in the way of that relationship between the people and their government. Back to Paniewski, who writes, this failure is framed as the media's grand conspiracy against the populist as the representative of the people. I wonder if you remember Donald Trump's admission to the CBS correspondent Leslie Stahl on the campaign trail. She would later tell an awards dinner of the moment that he admitted the real reason for his continually bashing the press. I'm quoting Ms. Stahl here. She said, he said, you know why I do it. I do it to discredit you all and demean you all. So when you write negative stories about me, no one will believe you. The larger the gap, in other words, that populists can create between recognisable media sources and the people, the less impeded they will be by any scrutiny, any attempt to hold them accountable for the decisions they make in power. You think that's old news? Just last week, Liz Truss told the host of the GB News hustings, it's not the BBC here, you actually get your facts right. It was an artful bit of flattery which she used to evade a challenging question. Now, in the earlier Leadsom example, her
And I think that that's definitely true, right? It just so happens that the media institutions that they're also in bed with, are happy to do that as well. They're happy to use that, and I genuinely believe that there is at least some amount of people within the BBC who do generally engage in fact-based reporting. Right? It's not all a bunch of people who are ideologically captured or whatever. And most analyses of the BBC's output will show that a lot of it is just pretty fact based, to be honest, like current affairs wise, right? But there was an explicit desire to try and undermine Jeremy Corbyn from 2016 through to 2019, right? This is when the doubts started coming through about the ways in which the BBC was, engaging in reasonable criticism and reasonable coverage over the general election campaigns, and there's plenty of evidence to show that they were biased against Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, in the run up to these elections, there was the London School of Economics did a study about the ways in which different media institutions would produce stories about Jeremy Corbyn, and the literal only one that wasn't overwhelmingly negative, like not even just neutral, fact based or whatever, was overwhelmingly negative rather opposed to positive or neutral, was the Daily Mirror. Guardian, Express, BBC, Times, Mail, Telegraph, Independent, everybody was overwhelmingly negative. Change my mind.
patriotism, which, if we're being generous, might have been completely unconscious, could be viewed as a way of stopping me being the conduit, the challenger between government negotiations and the public audience, and casting me in the role of the outsider, the traitor, someone who didn't quite care enough. When he was leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn could also be dismissive of what he would call, as Trump had done, the mainstream media. His supporters...
Oh yes, that's right. That's very true. A social democrat who just wants people not to, children to actually have food in their mouths and actually have affordable places to live, and make sure the climate crisis doesn't destroy our world. He's the same as the man who decided that he wanted to stop all Muslims coming to the United States, and bombed Qasem Soleimani, almost causing huge national tensions, whilst also explicitly just not telling the truth. Right? Person who stuffed his cabinet full of billionaires, and used his power to reduce the taxes on all his own mates and to try to avoid scrutiny, and then trying to override a fucking election. Yeah, Trump and Corbyn are definitely the same here. What a fucking ridiculous comparison.
Argue, I think it was not without good reason. Certainly, undeniably, the Murdoch-Rothermere-owned papers made no secret of their contempt for the man who wanted to be the next Labour Prime Minister.
Oh, of course, she's acknowledging that there is at least some... What the fuck? Oh, okay. Maybe maybe I spoke too soon. We'll see if she redeems herself.
Their attacks on Corbyn were relentless and vicious, but his distaste for a large proportion of the broadcast media, amplified by a small but dangerous group of hardened fans, would see the BBC's political editor have to attend the annual Labour Party conference accompanied by a bodyguard for her own safety.
Yeah, it's not like that she broke broadcasting code of impartiality covering the election around Corbyn. It's not as if she explicitly said a bunch of things that were just completely partisan in nature. It's not like the BBC's coverage at the time was explicitly anti-Corbyn. Right? Look at this shit, right? How on earth is this fact-based journalism? Look at this. Like photoshopping him to make sure his hat looks Russian in front of a picture of the fucking Kremlin. Him literally being Voldemort, one of the quintessentially most evil characters in all of fiction. Explicitly, like the kind of the personification of evil. Calling universal free broadband communism. The idea that somehow Jeremy Corbyn's attacks, or his criticisms of the broadcast media, especially not the BBC, are in any way unwarranted is just quite frankly fucking laughable, Emily. And the fact that you're here after you saying things like this...
Clear. And Dominic Grieve, you came on the programme last week and talked about country before party. You're going to fail the country on this one, possibly, and put Jeremy Corbyn in power. And let's be...
Yeah, so apparently Jeremy Corbyn in power would fail the country. I'm sure, Did she say anything about any of the other political candidates at that election? Or was that just explicit bias against Jeremy Corbyn from the supposed impartial BBC? I wonder, Emily, if maybe that we're just right about anti-Corbyn bias across the entirety of the broadcast media. And as I said, that London School of Economics study shows that we're right. It shows that we're right. I'm sorry, it just does.
Dunsberg's press conference questions and that of several of her colleagues were met with boos. It speaks volumes that the editor remained irreproachable against.
And she is a Tory as well. Like she's always been a conservative. The idea that she's not ideologically captured herself is just quite frankly fucking laughable.
Of such hostility. Our own Newsnight encounter of this kind was minor in comparison.
Well, there's literally like Laura Koenigsberg, wanting to be able to essentially stop Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister through her own lies that she told, whilst being political editor, and the rules that she broke on impartiality, just to make sure that she was able to walk home with a little bit less taxable income, right? Come on.
But it is probably worth putting on record here. In March 2018, after the Salisbury poisoning of the Skripals, the then Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, told Parliament that he found the act appalling, but he angered MPs by refusing to directly condemn Moscow, Putin, over its alleged responsibility for the poisoning. It involved the military-grade nerve agent Novichok, after all. So it was a story that we decided we'd put on Newsnight that night with a...
But he literally said, until we have explicit proof, let's not point fingers. I'm pretty sure that's what I recall it as then, Let me find it.
Large plasma screen of the Kremlin to symbolise the Russia context and Jeremy Corbyn in the forefront as the subject of that piece. That night, Twitter was alight, with Corbyn supporters alleging our graphics team had doctored the image to make Jeremy Corbyn appear more Russian.
Well, there we go. I mean, at least the BBC on this one, there we go. Just want absolute evidence of guilt. Yeah, absolutely. How trials work in this fucking country. You need to be able to have evidence provable beyond reasonable doubt before you sentence people. Come on.
The Canary website accused Newsnight of creating a blatant visual association between Vladimir Putin's Red Russia and Corbyn's Red Labour. A Squawk Box blog stated that the hat in the Newsnight composite has clearly been enlarged upwards for effect, and Corbyn's coat darkened so he looks more like a Russian Politburo member. Newsnight's programme
agreed.
Editor, Jess Brammer, tweeted out a replica of that same screen we'd used a month earlier, this time with the then Defence Secretary Gavin Williamson in the foreground. Curiously, it was Channel 4 who went to the effort of a full fact-check on that. They found that the hat only appeared taller because of a perspective distortion that was caused by the curvature of the screen, Newsnight's background screen. In other words, our graphic designer had received a vicious social media pile-on by people attributing to the programme a malice or a bias that could easily be traced to the shape of a TV studio plasma.
But, the ways in which the Newsnight specifically are undermining Corbyn's reasonable position on this, in the please give us absolute evidence of guilt, and then by all means, then blame Russia or whatever. A reasonable position for anybody to take, given the way in which the courts work in this country. And then again, the hat is not the issue as far as I'm concerned, really and truly. The real the idea, again, this weird association between Corbyn and the Kremlin, which again is completely nonsensical when Corbyn has been an outspoken critic of Vladimir Putin for the entirety of his tenure, literally non-stop. There's never been a time I've ever seen Corbyn not condemn Vladimir Putin. It's just nonsensical.
Honestly, at that time, we weren't sure whether to find the episode farcical or threatening, but we certainly felt very alone and rather caught in the headlights. But looking back now, in this context, I understand what Ms. Paniewski means when she talks about journalists' strategic bias, because by the end of that week, we had invited on a Corbyn supporter, commentator, to explain to us what we had done wrong. And she explains that the broadcaster's desire to be seen as neutral agents paradoxically enables populists to further spread the claim that we are not. We were offering a platform to the very people trying to tell the public to distrust our news.
I mean, be better at reporting and being not obviously biased and breaking impartiality rules, and then maybe we can talk. I'm sorry, like, you don't just get to not have a representative of the second biggest part, or the big, I guess the biggest party membership wise, second biggest party in the Commons, to be able to defend them against claims that their leader isn't somehow in league with Putin, right? Or at least related to Putin through the iconography that you've chosen to employ. And that doesn't cover, and that also doesn't cover all the rest of this shit. They're literally portraying Corbyn as Voldemort. Nonsensical discussions of sensible Labour policy by trying to describe it as communism or nationalising sausages. Like, Emily, surely you're not this fucking stupid.
Sometimes we tie ourselves in knots over the both-sidism balance I spoke of before. My editor, Dan Clark, reminded me of the time we were granted an interview with Robert De Niro from New York. It was the height of COVID, and New York had been decimated by the disease. There were makeshift morgues and a ghostly city abandoned by anyone with a means to leave. It was a really sobering time, but equally an exciting one to have an interview with one of the world's best-loved actors. And I just wanted to know what it felt like for this archetypal New Yorker to see the city and its people so bereft. As we began the interview, however, it was clear that De Niro had other things on his mind than New York. He wanted to rage about President Trump's mishandling of the pandemic. He accused him of not caring how many died. It was, for context, 3 weeks after Trump had given the infamous bleach press conference, where he was seen to be suggesting the use of disinfectant to fight COVID inside the body. De Niro told me, I'm going to spare you my De Niro voice because I don't think you want that here. It's great. De Niro told me, it's scary because everyone is sort of nonplussed and stunned at what this guy Trump is doing. You've got a lunatic saying things that people are trying to dance around. It's appalling. But in my ear, Dan, editor Dan, is urging me, as is his editorial job, to put the other side. And I'm resisting it because, quite frankly, what is the other side? Do I say, nonsense, bleach might work? We just won't know until we've tried. What? I mean, or do I...
And this, to be fair, at least this is a correct criticism from Maitlis here. The idea that we said we just have to have a debate about everything from both sides and then treat them as equally weighted. But again, why no one other than the trans community decides to talk about this in relation to the BBC's coverage of what's happening about transgender people at the moment? I find incredibly frustrating.
And you didn't mention the disinfectant. Oh, no, I don't think we've heard that. No, it's on the tape. Or do I say, oh, you're only saying that because you're a liberal, lefty, lovey Democrat, which doesn't seem to capture the gravitas of this moment when he's talking about a horrendous death toll in America. So as an attempt at pushback, I begin, Trump's fan base would take issue with that. Well, they would, of course. That's why they're his fan base, right? But De Niro then bats this away by saying, Trump doesn't care for these people. The people he pretends to care about are the people he has the most disdain for. Which I let hang in the air. Because, quite frankly, I've heard many within Trump's own party and Trump's own circle say the exact same thing to me. Anyway, the reason I'm recounting this is not for the exchange.
But that's true. Like, that's 100% true. In that people, like the quote-unquote right populists, as Emily would call them, definitely do only pretend to care about the people that they claim to represent, when in reality they explicitly care about a bunch of special interest groups and a bunch of bourgeois people who have a lot of money who want to keep that money and are happy to use divide and conquer tactics around social policy to gain power for their own material benefit, right? That's true. That's 100% true.
For what happens next, we finish the pre-recorded interview. Adam Comiskey is the output editor. He's a big film buff. And as we're heading up in the lift, I turn to Adam and I say, we can't possibly run this. It's too anti-Trump. And Adam looks at me to see if I'm joking. And I'm not. I'm terrified that by putting out the interview as it stands, we will be seen as biased. De Niro is a world-famous actor and a New Yorker, and he's chosen our programme, Newsnight, as the place to land his thoughts quite carefully.
I mean, if Robert De Niro's doing the anti-Trump stuff, like, that's just Robert De Niro's opinion. You can put that out and just say, well, Robert De Niro believes that. That's a thing that you can do.
So why do I feel unable to let him say it without trying to find an equally world-famous actor who that same night is miraculously going to tell us the opposite? And wouldn't I be tumbling into both-sidism, false equivalence, even if we had. It speaks again to how forcefully even these imagined populist accusations of bias work on the journalist's brain, to the point where we censor our own interviews to avoid the backlash. The coda to this story is that the De Niro interview did go out, probably with more, but his fan base, pushback from me than was strictly necessary, and the sky didn't fall down. Adam, at least, was very happy. The news lines were picked up around the world. But it's curious now to look back on our reactions because of what happened 2 weeks later.
And again, it's the biggest frustration is I think, again, as I said, I think that it's not really as important, the issue about whatever they did about the Salisbury poisoning, against the way in which that they refused to properly give a reasonable platform for Corbyn's actual policies and their effective utility, rather than denouncing them as being communism. Like, that is the real issue at hand here, and the way in which that, in general, just basic social democratic political positions have just become the complete anathema of all broadcast journalism at this point. And you can literally advocate for a bunch of things that they have had in Europe for decades, and the sky hasn't fallen down. The rebirth of Vladimir Lenin hasn't happened, but you just can advocate for these things, and people call you a communist, right?
The now infamous Dominic Cummings Newsnight introduction got way more attention than, in truth, it ever deserved. It was neither the best nor the worst opening we've ever done. I say we because the scripts were, as always, written, modified, rewritten, edited, signed off by a team. The original story, you'll remember, had been broken by Pippa Crerar, her excellent colleagues at The Mirror, who then went on to report many more stories of rule breaking over the subsequent 12 months. We merely picked up the story the day after the Cummings Rose Garden press conference. And our intro stated bluntly and baldly that he'd broken the rules. And it asked why the government, Boris Johnson, was standing by him. The introduction set out, as is often the case, the rest of the show. We had Conservative MPs explaining the PM's loyalty. We had pollsters explaining the public horror on that issue. We had defenders, we had critics, and we had a detailed analysis of which rules had been broken and when. In other words, the introduction was a précis of what viewers could expect of the whole show. And on the night itself, the programme passed off with a few pleasant texts from BBC editors and, frankly, little else. It was only the next morning that the wheels fell off. A phone call of complaint was made from Downing Street to the BBC News management. This, for context, is not unusual. It wasn't unusual in the Blair days, far from it, in the Brown days, in the Cameron days. What I'm saying is, it is pretty normal for government spin doctors to vocalise their displeasure with journalists. What was not foreseen was the speed with which the BBC sought to pacify the complainant. Within hours, a very public apology was made. The programme was accused of a failure of impartiality. The recording disappeared from the iPlayer, and there were paparazzi outside my front door. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not standing here trying to pretend our intro was the Gettysburg Address. When I hear it now, honestly, I think it was a bit...
I also think, again, another issue they have with this ridiculous kind of conflation of not even left radicalism, but radicalism as far as current liberalism is concerned, and right wing radicalism, is that left wing radicalism is a populist movement that is driven explicitly by people who, rather than driven by particular interest, like monetary interests, whereas right populism is driven by financial interests. It's driven by a desire to be able to get richer rather than a desire to do better. And that's why I just find it incredibly frustrating that these two things get conflated so often. It's very incredibly frustrating. It's just that all liberals think that anything that goes out, what they deem as an acceptable bounds of discussion around politics, must be in some way equivalent. This whole horseshoe theory nonsense.
Long-winded, wordy, sounded a bit peaked, but I don't think, wow, what a shocking breach of impartiality because we called out the actions of one of the chief architects of the COVID laws. We show our impartiality when we report without fear or favour, when we're not scared to hold power to account, even when it feels uncomfortable to do so. When we understand that if we've covered rule-breaking by a Scottish...
the incredibly powerful Jeremy Corbyn MP.
Chief medical officer or an English government scientist, then journalistic rigour should be applied to those who make policy within number 10. The one person, ironically, who understood this was Dominic Cummings himself, who texted me that very evening to offer his wry support. So back to the speed of response. Weird, right? Why had the BBC immediately and publicly...
I mean, if there's anybody who's actually been pretty candid and vocal to talk about things without fear over the last kind of 18 months or so, actually, ironically, is Dominic Cummings. But then again, I don't get that, man. I just don't get what his deal is. Because he was so intent on being the architect of a mass movement towards, hard right politics, and then as soon as being ditched by Boris Johnson, he just completely condemns it. Is he just raw power hungry? I have no idea what the man's game is. I wish I could decipher it.
sought to confirm the government spokesman's opinion without any kind of due process. It makes no sense for an organisation that is admirably, famously rigorous about procedure, unless it was perhaps sending a message of reassurance directly to the government itself. Put this in the context of the BBC board, where another active agent of the Conservative Party, a former Downing Street spin doctor and former advisor to BBC rival GB News, now sits, acting as the arbiter of BBC impartiality. According to the Financial Times, he's attempted to block the appointment of journalists he considers damaging to government relations, provoking Labour's deputy leader, among others, to call it Tory cronyism at the heart of the BBC. The UK correspondent of the German public broadcaster ARD, Annette Dittert, goes a step further. She writes, public service broadcasters must always act as the corrective, should always hold governments accountable, must never end up becoming the megaphone. That's the whole point of publicly owned broadcasters in a liberal democracy. And Paniewski has a warning for what happens when we avoid rebuffing populist accusations. She believes that journalists become complicit in the debilitation of their own status and authority. Paradoxically, she writes, their attempts to protect their professional objective facade may contribute to the public's belief they are, in fact, biased.
What is incredibly interesting as well, how she obviously will mention Robbie Gibbs' his appointment into the BBC board for impartiality to try and stop, apparently, his comments saying that there's endemic woke bias in entertainment output on the BBC, to try and be the arbiter of BBC impartiality, which is a reasonable criticism of her to make. It's reasonable for her to critique appointing this man who was basically just who's donated hundreds of thousands of pounds to the Conservative Party at this point. He's just a Conservative Party activist, quite frankly, at this beyond all reasonable doubt. Yet for some reason, doesn't mention about the fact of his position as head of BBC Westminster at the time of the 2017 general election. It's incredibly strange how she just neglects to mention that while she's trying to defend their editorial line on Jeremy Corbyn and what they've done and the way in which that they discussed him at the time of that election, or leading up to that election, and then not somehow correlating it with the same person that she is now critiquing for being the arbiter of impartiality in a non-impartial basis right now. It's great, like literally there was I've got up in this tab, I think it's in this tab, yeah. Like, where she said, literally her, at that time, saying people see conspiracy at the BBC when it's just a confluence of cock-ups. But now the threat of Corbyn's gone, suddenly, she's happy, quite frankly happy to say, well, actually, no, we just have we have an issue with there being people being appointed by the government who are undermining BBC's commitment to impartiality. It's really weird how suddenly the threat of Corbyn goes, and now it's completely acceptable. It's completely acceptable to make this criticism of endemic bias, right? It's really strange how that happens, isn't it?
Doing it to ourselves. We, journalists, management teams, organisations, are primed to back down, even apologise, to prove how journalistically fair we are being. And that can then be exploited by those crying bias. If it suits those in power to shut us up or down, they can. Critically, it is lose-lose for the audience. And there's the rub. Because whatever our journalism does, it must earn the trust of our listeners, our audiences, our readers. Otherwise, we are mouthpieces. We are mere clients of those in authority, cosy with those in command, disconnected from the very people that we are trying to serve.
I
A
wonder.
lot of the examples that I've used here have been from my own experience. They weren't meant to be my greatest hits nor my walk of shame. It's just the stuff that I found easiest to revisit with questions of how we should be doing our job better. I apologise to anyone who came thinking this would be about the Prince Andrew interview. That will have to wait till next time, promise. And to those of you wondering why this still feels stuck in the Brexit and the Trump days, I'll say this.
Literally, we were just dismissed as conspiracy theorists and cranks, right? People love calling people on the left cranks for saying, well, maybe people who are part of the capitalist infrastructure are gonna have bias in favor of capital, and they're just like, oh, that's just a conspiracy. I'm like, no, it's just a set of material interests.
We are. Those two seismic shifts have not been and gone, they've come and stayed. 18 months after an attempted coup on the Capitol, on the democratic functioning of America, the architect behind the lie that brought the rioters is considering another run for president with the backing of millions of Americans. Here in the UK, we spent early summer watching the havoc at Dover Customs meet with a wall of silence around Brexit. Those who promised to get...
There wasn't a wall of silence around the Dover Customs. It was all over the news. What are you talking about, Emily?
Brexit done. Can't mention it, because it clearly isn't. Their insistence on third nation status has meant passport checks and horrendous waiting times. Labour avoid...
I think the issue as well is that, I think the only... actually, that's probably reasonable criticism. They're the only two institutions that I've seen critique the issues around the Northern Ireland Protocol that I've talked about fucking relentlessly on this channel. Everyone's probably sick of me hearing about, the lie the the lie that Boris Johnson told the public that he admitted was a lie to Ian Paisley Jr. about how he had no intention of honouring the Northern Ireland Protocol, and it was just in the manifesto so they could say that they had the oven-ready deal and they could get Brexit done to try and beat Jeremy Corbyn at the election, and they were always going to scrap the Northern Ireland Protocol and renegotiate it. So Brexit was never done. There was no oven-ready deal. There was never any intimations that things being already sorted. But no one mentions that, because that might cast aspersions on the outcomes of the election that ousted Jeremy Corbyn.
It's talking about Brexit because it's decided, rightly or wrongly, to distance itself from Remainer tags. And large sections of both the BBC and government-supporting newspapers appear to go into an automatic crouch position whenever the Brexit issue looms large. Many broadcasters fear discussing the obvious economic cause of major change in this country in case they get labelled pessimistic, anti-populist, or worse still, see above, unpatriotic. And yet every day that we sidestep these issues...
Well, but the issue is loads of people didn't see economics as the driving reason around Brexit. That wasn't the main thing that people cared about when Brexit was a discussion. And I get the point of view on this one, because there have been plenty of adverse economic impacts due to leaving the European Union. I'm not going to dispute that, but I don't think you're going to, without engaging with this idea in its totality, people aren't going to listen to you. And what good is journalism if it's just either preaching to the choir, or said in a vacuum, or said to nobody, without audience?
Layering emissions feels like a conspiracy against the British people. We are pushing the public further away. Why should our viewers, our listeners, come to us to interpret and explain what's going on when they can see our own reluctance to do so? So that's why I believe we have some catching up to do. Journalism isn't a dry academic study or a polished set of rules. It is a connection we share with our audience when we're helping them to understand things better. The behaviour I describe here, much of it my own, was not a solution. It was a coping strategy. So how do we move on from that? Where are the solutions? Well, firstly, I suspect it's about sunlight. We need to show our workings more. We need to be braver about explaining the pressures under which we come and our own responses to them. And in that spirit, I will admit, without getting too meta, that as I stand here, as I'm speaking to you, I'm conscious of an internal self-editing. I'm still thinking what the headlines of this speech will be. Will they make me look bad, or dull, or preachy, or reckless? Will everyone fixate on one line about Corbyn, or Cummings, or Trump? Will it turn large parts of the press against...
Oh wait, was it one line about Corbyn, or was it consistent undermining? I wonder. And again, no, none of it. Like the issue is that the criticisms that were made of their coverage around Corbyn and the criticisms that are made around their coverage around Boris Johnson are completely different for one driving reason, in that the issue around the coverage of Boris Johnson from his supporters were the idea that focus on things that he has or hasn't done is somehow evidence of bias, by saying that, by spending time talking about things like Partygate, things like the crony contracts, things like the racist statements, things like his links to Russian oligarchs, all of this kind of stuff, which is just verifiable fact. It's the idea that it's bias based upon the fact that they're talking about that at all. Whereas the criticism from Corbyn supporters are about their perception of what Jeremy Corbyn represents, and the discussion of the effective utility of his policy platform. Like, there's a difference between saying Boris Johnson did this thing, and this is why this Jeremy Corbyn policy is communism, broadband communism, right? These are two completely different things, and the fact that the liberal media can't see why these two things are different just shows liberal ideology in just as in its most kind of naked form, really.
Me. And will that stop me from going further than I should, if the goal ultimately is to explain to the public how we do our job? I'm telling you this now, so you know. I think we also need to find a glossary, a shorthand, if you like. We, the frogs, have to give names to the populist playbook tricks that we encounter. The InfoWars host, Alex Jones, shortly to be $45 million poorer, is not a conspiracy theorist in the sense he believes the rot he peddles. That doesn't appear to be the case. He peddles it to make money from subscribers to whom he then sells dietary supplements. Let's not intellectualize and debate the merits of this as free speech any more than we would fake medicines. This is just a business model. When we hear Donald Trump or Zach Goldsmith or Nadine Dorris or Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about a witch hunt, or Boris Johnson going the way of deep state chat, our senses should be primed. This is often a precursor to the rejection of legitimate checks and balances. We should ask why they're so afraid of scrutiny. We should beware the parallel that is not remotely parallel. The FBI search on Trump's house at Mar-a-Lago this month was reimagined by Trump for his supporters as equivalent to Richard Nixon's burglary of the Watergate office building. It wasn't. It's a trope. See false equivalence. Just as we now understand, when we hear the phrase fake news, we should think of Trump's own definition for it, a conscious attempt to discredit and demean. Let's not turn ourselves inside out, wondering if it's true. So the more we recognise these tropes as old, slightly sad and
Yeah, because it's interesting, you never heard anyone on the left talk about fake news, quote unquote. It was all about a biased angle and a biased discussion of the issues.
Friends, the better equipped we are to call them out. Next, perhaps the style of our reporting can change too. I'm excited to see how the podcast we're launching next week with Global and Persephonica, the news agents, will allow us room to move away from cellophane wrap formality to lift the curtain on why things happen, how we choose our stories and how we book our guests. We've got the news agents here on the front row, Dino, Lewis, Sopal, Soaps, Gabriel, and there's others back home who are watching. But we're keen to bring you what we're going to do next. And I hope that instead of the cliched stagecraft of supporter X versus supporter Y, we might choose nuance, as we did occasionally on Americast. There, a conversation sometimes would go like this. What do you think of politician A? That's us asking. And the member of the public would say, liar, charlatan, hypocrite. And we'd say, you voted for him last time. Would you again? And the member of the public would say, yes, probably. Because actually, people are complicated. They're not cardboard cutouts. An exchange like that might tell us more about, say, Trump's appeal to the Latino gay Floridian businessman, or Johnson's appeal to the Cheshire mother.
Yeah, because it's the businessman part that's important. Like, any amount of denigration on a social level is gonna be undercut by his desire to put more money into the pockets of business owners.
And fitness instructor in a way that staunch advocates cannot. The News Agents podcast allows us the chance to build loyalty with people who like something with its edges on display. Daily News now accounts for 10% of all podcast downloads. Crucially, it's attracting newer and younger audiences. So it is imperative for both them and for us that we get this right. Fourthly, tweets. The professor of political communication, Custer Fries, asks, would a news organisation publish a corporate press release in full without offering context or asking questions? We do so with tweets. He believes we should hold social media messages to the same standard, even if they come from, say, a head of government. tweets need the same level of scrutiny in terms of whether they should even be considered for publication. We are at our
Or
most...
just like what just stories that you decide to put out. Like, I don't know if anybody else remembered. I think I might have covered this in the segment I did about strike action. Like, where the BBC were putting out sub stories about people negatively affected by the strikes as them like kind of leading articles that they were sharing from the BBC website on the BBC News Twitter account, going, look at all these people negatively affected by the strikes. Here, listen to their sob stories about, okay, brilliant. Are you going to give equal coverage to the issues regarding the actual struggles of the side of Labour in this dispute? Come on.
basic, the mediators between the actions of those in power and the public. So fifthly, finally, most excitingly, the challenge for us, I think, is how we live up to that responsibility in a way that is both fair and robust, because either without the other is useless. So let me finish with an example that my colleague Lewis Goodall threw in the path of ideas as we mulled over the voyage of our poor boiling frog. Let's imagine, he said provocatively, the Supreme Court in America has overturned Brown versus the Board of Education, that 1954 landmark ruling that would forever end racial segregation in public schools. Let's imagine that's overturned. What would the media do then? He asked. So I'm asking that now. Would we just document it, settled fact? Would we call it out as racist? Would we offer up both sides, leave people to decide if they like it? Is it enough, in other words, to report things that might radically change the very fabric of our democracies and our societies as if they were merely a weather update, leaving no discernible impact on the lives of those we address? It is a big leap. And I'm not, by the way, suggesting anything of the sort is going to happen in America. But I ask the question here because it scares me.
At time of recording.
Because whilst we don't have to be campaigners, but nor should we be complacent, complicit onlookers. Our job is to make sense of what we're seeing and anticipate the next move. It's the moment, in other words, that frog should be leaping out of the boiling water and phoning all its friends to warn them. But by then, we're so far along the path of passivity, we're cooked. Thank you very much.
And again, it's just frustrating that this is all coming out now, that this discussion about this is only happening now and wasn't happening before 2019. And she believes fully that it's only since 2019 that this has become an issue. And she's even spoken about how the idea that there's some kind of bias before then is just nonsensical. She even just explicitly tried to disprove that with her little segment there about the coverage around Jeremy Corbyn and Salisbury, as if that's the only single criticism people have. Like, and in general, like, you see biased ways in which these things are reported, not just in political reporting, but all across the shop, right? You look, for example, there's an excellent video by Tom Nicholas discussing manufactured consent, talking about that framing of looking at the way in which the media will cover an issue. And then you look, and the way in which they covered migrants arriving at boats in Dover involves an interview with a person from an anti-migrant pressure group, an interview with Natalie Elphicke MP, and then a news reporter looking at the boats and the ways in which they were coming in. So this was bias. That was a biased piece of reporting. I think a lot of the time we do kind of get sucked into discussions of political figures, and I know that I do that as well. Like, I don't want to have to talk about Jeremy Corbyn, right? I hate having to continue talking about Jeremy Corbyn, but when they continue to demonize him and spread lies about him and call him every name under the sun, like, he is being used as a proxy against leftist politics in general to try and discredit us as political actors. So if I don't defend his legacy or defend him as a person, that's attacking against the ideological basis of the things that I believe by proxy, essentially. So I have to defend him. And now, considering that the policy platforms that were poo-pooed by the media, that were dismissed as literal communism by the very organisation that Emily Maitlis is trying to defend in their coverage of the 2017-2019 general elections, is being shown to be policy that we sorely needed now. And now the horse has bolted and the system's collapsed. All the Liberals are hand-wringing about how it got to this mess. There you go. This is how we got to this mess, Emily. This is how we got here. We got here through complacency and through I hate to say it, right? But this just essentially liberal ideas that they are somehow above ideology. Their belief in liberal supremacy, liberal ideological supremacy over everything else, right? I believe that you can make completely evidentiary criticism empirically of right-wing ideology, right? Probably can do of left-wing ideology, but the idea that we can't critique liberal ideology is baked into programming in general across the media. And that's why I think you get a lot of people from both sides of the political spectrum saying the BBC is biased. In the main kind of liberal paradigm is, again, socially liberal but fiscally conservative a lot of the time. That's generally how a lot of these things act. And so people who have been kind of trained by the media, essentially, to only think of things through social policy, to view the liberal order with regards to econ policy as being settled science, as being received wisdom, as I critiqued at the start of this. The idea of neoliberal doctrine being, the end of history with regards to how we deal with our economy. That the only apparent shift that we can have with regards to any of these, with any particular prescription on ideological grounds, is to do with social narratives, and that's why the BBC will sometimes get perceived as being left biased by people on the right, because they will present things, with an appeal to social liberalism from from a kind of social policy background, but they've all drank the same neoliberal Kool-Aid as everybody else, so much so that some kind of universal broadband policy can be described as communist, and it really does show. It throws into sharp relief, really, the liberals' belief in their own supremacy of their ideology, and in the way in which they believe themselves to be 100% correct. Like, we look at this tweet from here of Dan Hodges that I hate to have to agree with. I disagree with him calling them the liberal left. They're just liberals at the end of the day. But him saying the debate is so revealing. The liberal left literally does not believe that BBC's job is to put both sides of a debate like Brexit. I think the BBC should take an editorial decision on which side is right, then simply present their point of view. Now, there's things I disagree with here, actually. The first thing I disagree with is the idea that what side is right is an editorial decision. No, it's an evidentiary decision. So you present the evidence as it exists, and then you report whether that's positive or negative on a utilitarian basis. That's what I believe, right? So, for example, you take an issue like Brexit, and you talk about whether or not it's been correct. Like TLDR News have been really good at reporting on the externalities of Brexit as it exists. But Dan Hodges here believes that both sidesism, what she was talking about in the interview, in her speech there, sorry, I actually genuinely agreed with this idea that by presenting an idea just being two different sides of the same coin, or different sides of a coin, sorry, which just need to be able to debate, and then we'll find out which one has more merit. That's not how reality works. Reality, there is an empirical basis for everything, and things should be presented with that empirical basis in mind, such as, for example, the issue around trans people. A bunch of conspiracy theorists who think that it's a Jewish plot to sell children drugs to be able to maintain big pharma profits are not the same people that we should look at, as opposed to the vast majority of the medical consensus around trans people. But the way in which this has been framed by the media, including the BBC, has been as some kind of debate rather than an empirical issue. So I actually disagree with that. But the way in which we talked about Brexit, I think, is true. I think his criticisms of the way in which some of the liberal media do talk about Brexit, they focus too much on saying, well, look at the queues at Dover, look at the issues with the economic impacts, when a lot of people did not care. They don't care about the impacts of Brexit. From an economic standpoint, they just wanted fewer Europeans in the country. And you can call that as racially motivated, right? But unless you acknowledge their ideas, you're not going to be able to bring them to the party. And so excising that point of view from the discourse is just turning people towards the kind of politics that you're trying to avoid them adopting, which is the kind of the cyclical issue of liberal positioning around political ideology, right? There is no real economic case for Brexit. People have one. I'd love to hear it, but we're not seeing any of the benefits. But if you are somebody who wants to see less immigration coming because of single market access into the UK, you got what you wanted with Brexit, and economic benefits will be secondary to that, and that's what the BBC has missed here. So I disagree actually, sorry, with Dan on what he's actually said here, but they need covering the issue in its totality has been an issue for liberals in general with regards to Brexit, and that's why they turned against Mick Lynch in the way that they did, because his point of view, which one of which I disagree with, and in my video about him, I clearly disagreed. And I think Nick Lynch is wrong about Brexit, but they immediately all just heard that he was for Brexit, sorry, and they immediately dismissed him as being just like everybody else who wanted Brexit to happen, and that's an issue with liberal understanding of discourse in this country, and I think Emily Maitlis's issue here about, again, the idea of liberal ideological supremacy has really been displayed in full force with the talk that we just watched there. Anyway, if you enjoyed that segment and my kind of disjointed rambling over stuff, you can comment, you can subscribe on YouTube. You can now become a member on YouTube. It's only 99p. If you're watching the stream on YouTube right now, I'm not even checking my stats for this. Apparently, there's 12 people watching across both platforms I'm streaming on. If you're on YouTube and you want to become a member and want to support my content, it's only 99p, and you get access to all my emotes in YouTube chat and the knowledge that you're not being a freeloader anymore. So if you want to do that, feel free. It's fine. I don't like if you want if you want to donate. I don't have PayPal, so you're best off subscribing on Twitch. Thank you for the follow. DKeton X, I've never pronounced your name. Thank you for following on Twitch. Welcome to the No Justice stream. If you want to donate, you're best off becoming a YouTube member or subscribing on Twitch. But also, if you want to leave a comment about how I'm an ideologically captured leftist, please do. Always welcome discussion in my comment sections. But anyway, if you want to check out any more of my content, I would very much welcome you to do so. In which case, I will catch you on the next video.